It was a chilly morning in early spring when Margaret walked through the familiar streets of her small town, wrapped in a cozy scarf and carrying a worn leather bag. At 65, she had lived through decades of joys and heartbreaks. Yet she felt a strange emptiness after her husband passed away 5 years ago. Her children were grown and busy with their own lives, and her friends reminded her that life would go on, but Margaret felt as though time had quietly slipped away. The town had changed, yet it retained its comforting familiarity. Margaret remembered walking these streets with her husband when they were newlyweds, sharing laughter and dreams that seemed endless. Now every corner, shop, and faded sign evoked memories both comforting and painful. Despite the melancholy, Margaret had a small routine to keep herself engaged: morning walks, volunteering at the library, and occasional social gatherings. Yet something inside her whispered that there was still more life to be lived. One afternoon, while sipping tea at a quaint cafe she had frequented for years, Margaret noticed a new face behind the counter. He was a man in his late 60s, with a gentle smile and eyes that reflected untold stories. Their first conversation was brief about the weather, the new pastries, the small changes in town, but it lingered in Margaret's mind long after she left. She found herself thinking about him, wondering about his life, and secretly hoping to see him again. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret visited the cafe more often. Each encounter brought small exchanges of stories and laughter. She learned his name was Thomas, a retired history teacher who had moved back to town to be close to his grandchildren. Thomas, like her, had experienced loss and solitude, and in his quiet way, he understood the gentle sadness behind her smiles. One spring evening, Thomas invited Margaret for a walk in the botanical garden. The air smelled of blooming flowers, and the soft hum of bees filled the evening. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a thrill in her heart. Walking side by side, they shared stories and laughter, and she realized she had found a connection that transcended age, a connection tender, genuine, and human. In that moment, Margaret understood that life had not passed her by. Love was not bound by age. It could be rediscovered at any point, often when least expected. The garden seemed to glow with a magical light, reflecting the warmth of a second chance, a new beginning she had never imagined. Margaret's heart, once heavy, now carried a quiet hope. The days ahead seemed bright with promise, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive again. Margaret's days began to change subtly. She no longer dreaded the silence of her apartment or the empty evenings. Thomas had introduced a gentle rhythm into her life: morning walks to the cafe, afternoons in the park, and long conversations about books, history, and their childhood memories. The town felt alive in a new way, as if it had been waiting quietly for this unexpected reunion of souls. One sunny morning, Thomas suggested a visit to the old art museum downtown. Margaret hesitated at first. It had been years since she immersed herself in art, yet, as she stepped into the high-ceilinged gallery filled with sunlight and echoes of history, she felt a thrill of curiosity. Paintings of landscapes, portraits, and abstract works reminded her of dreams she had set aside long ago. Thomas watched her eyes light up, and she realized how much joy could still be found in simple pleasures. They lingered by a painting of a quiet lake, and Thomas spoke softly about the artist's life and vision. Margaret listened intently, captivated by both the story and the person beside her. There was an ease in their connection, a quiet understanding that transcended words. For the first time in decades, Margaret felt the thrill of being understood and appreciated, not for what she had achieved, but for who she was. As spring deepened, their friendship blossomed into something tender and unmistakable. Evenings were spent sharing meals, visiting small local events, and discovering hidden corners of the town together. Margaret's children noticed a new spark in her, a joy that seemed to radiate from within. They were cautiously happy for her, sensing that their mother had found someone who truly valued her companionship. One weekend, Thomas invited Margaret to a small town festival. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of freshly baked treats. They wandered through the stalls, tasting delicacies, and joining in the lively spirit of the celebration. In a quiet moment, Thomas took Margaret's hand and gently squeezed it. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition that life, despite its challenges, could still surprise her with moments of pure happiness. Returning home, Margaret reflected on the journey she had taken in just a few weeks. She had opened her heart to the possibility of love again, and in doing so, had rediscovered her own strength, resilience, and capacity for joy. Thomas was more than a companion. He was a mirror reflecting the best parts of herself, reminding her that life was never too late for new beginnings. The days that followed were filled with shared laughter, quiet mornings, and the comforting presence of someone who truly cared. Margaret understood, now that life's second chances were not merely about romance, they were about reclaiming the fullness of living, embracing vulnerability, and finding beauty in the ordinary. With Thomas by her side, she looked forward to each day with a renewed sense of wonder and gratitude. Summer deepened, and Margaret found herself savoring every moment with Thomas. Mornings were spent tending to her small garden, where flowers she had once neglected now thrived under her care. Thomas would join her, kneeling in the soil, sharing stories of his own childhood adventures. Margaret laughed more freely than she had in years, realizing that these simple rituals had become the heartbeat of her days. One afternoon they stumbled upon an old bookstore tucked away on a quiet street. The smell of aged paper and polished wood filled the air. Margaret ran her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling a connection to the countless lives and stories held within. Thomas suggested they pick out a book for each other. Margaret chose a novel about lost love and redemption, while Thomas handed her a collection of poems. They spent the afternoon reading aloud in a cozy corner, their voices mingling with the quiet hum of the shop. As the weeks passed, their conversations grew deeper. They spoke of regrets, lost opportunities, and the dreams they had once held but never pursued. Margaret shared memories of her youth, the excitement of first loves, and the pain of parting ways with old friends. Thomas listened without judgment, offering insights and gentle encouragement. In his presence, Margaret felt seen, not just for her past, but for the person she was becoming. One evening, Thomas surprised her with a picnic by the river. The sky blushed with shades of pink and gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. They sat on a soft blanket, sharing food and stories, the water reflecting the fading light. Margaret realized that she had not felt this level of peace and contentment in decades. The gentle presence of someone who understood her heart, who respected her independence while offering companionship, was a rare and precious gift. As twilight settled, Thomas reached for Margaret's hand. She felt a surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude, joy, and a quiet thrill at the possibilities that lay ahead. Life, she realized, was not about the years behind her, but the moments she chose to embrace now. With Thomas by her side, she felt ready to welcome whatever the future held, confident that love and friendship could blossom even in the later chapters of life. Returning home, Margaret reflected on how much her perspective had shifted. The world seemed brighter, richer, and more inviting. Simple pleasures, a warm cup of tea, a shared laugh, a quiet walk in the park had taken on new significance. Thomas had shown her that life's beauty was not measured by age, but by the depth of connection and the courage to open one's heart again. Autumn arrived with a crispness in the air, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold. Margaret and Thomas embraced the season with quiet excitement, taking long walks through the park where leaves crunched beneath their feet. They shared stories about past autumns, the laughter of children in the distance, and the simple pleasures that had once gone unnoticed in the rush of life. Every moment felt deliberate, cherished, and filled with warmth. One Saturday, Thomas invited Margaret to his family home, a quaint cottage nestled near a small lake. As they drove, she admired the changing landscape, the way sunlight dappled the ground through fiery foliage. At the cottage, Thomas introduced her to his nieces and nephews, who welcomed her with curiosity and kindness. Margaret felt an unfamiliar thrill. This was a life that blended her own solitude with the warmth of a larger circle, a bridge between her past and the new connections forming in her present. Inside, the cottage was cozy and inviting, With the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke lingering in the air, Thomas guided Margaret to a small study where he kept mementos from his own life, photographs, letters, and books that told the story of his journey. Margaret was touched by the trust he showed her. Sharing his memories with openness and honesty, she realized that trust was the foundation of their bond, a delicate thread that had strengthened over shared moments and quiet understanding. As evening fell, they cooked dinner together, laughter echoing through the kitchen. Margaret chopped vegetables while Thomas stirred a simmering pot of stew, exchanging playful banter that reminded her of youthful camaraderie. They talked about their dreams, hopes for the coming months, and even fears about aging and change. Yet in each other's company, those fears felt lighter, tempered by compassion and the steady rhythm of companionship. After dinner, they settled by the fireplace with mugs of hot cocoa. Margaret marveled at how easily conversations flowed, how natural it felt to sit in silence, simply enjoying presence without the need for words. Thomas read passages from a novel, his voice soothing and steady while Margaret listened, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders. In that moment, she understood that love at this stage of life was different. It was quiet, resilient, and profoundly nurturing. Night fell, and Margaret returned home, her heart full. She reflected on the day's simple yet profound joys, the acceptance, the laughter, and the gentle connection that had grown between them. Autumn, she realized, was not just a season of change in nature, but a season of transformation within herself. Through Thomas, she had learned that the heart could still be surprised, still find joy, and still take chances. No matter the years that had passed, winter crept in softly, dusting the town with a delicate layer of snow. Margaret awoke one morning to find the world transformed. Streets glistening under the early light, rooftops frosted, and trees heavy with white. She bundled up in her warmest coat and set out to meet Thomas for their weekly walk. The cold air invigorating, brushing rosy life into her cheeks. Every breath felt crisp and alive. Every footstep on the snow, a gentle reminder of the simple wonders of existence. Thomas waited by the corner cafe, a scarf snug around his neck, a broad smile lighting his face. Margaret joined him, and together they ventured through quiet streets, their laughter mingling with the distant jingling of bells. Conversations flowed effortlessly, touching upon memories from youth, past travels, and small, unnoticed acts of kindness that had shaped their lives. They spoke of family, of dreams deferred and rekindled, and of the subtle joys that often went unappreciated in younger years. On a whim, Thomas suggested they try ice skating at the town's small rink. Margaret hesitated, recalling her lack of practice. But Thomas's encouraging gaze emboldened her. Soon they glided awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence laughing at each stumble and enjoying the exhilaration of motion on ice. She felt a warmth that defied the cold, a gentle thrill from stepping beyond her comfort zone and sharing vulnerability with someone she trusted. After skating, they warmed themselves with steaming mugs of cocoa in a nearby cafe. Margaret noticed the way Thomas's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet strength in his presence that made her feel grounded. They spoke of seasons past, recalling their own younger selves, and marveled at how life's unpredictability had led them to this moment. Margaret realized that these experiences, though simple, were layered with profound meaning, reminders that companionship could heal and enrich even the most ordinary days. As days grew shorter and nights longer, their friendship deepened. Margaret found herself looking forward to the evenings spent by Thomas's fireplace, reading together, sharing stories, and simply sitting in quiet comfort. She cherished the unspoken understanding, the small gestures that conveyed care and attention. In Thomas's presence, she felt a sense of belonging that had long been absent, a calm acceptance of who she had become and what she still desired. One evening, as snow fell silently outside, Thomas took her hand and suggested a new tradition, a winter scrapbook, documenting their shared experiences, from walks in the park to cafe visits. Margaret embraced the idea, delighted by the thought of capturing their moments, tangible memories that could be revisited in years to come. This small act became symbolic of their relationship, a commitment to nurturing joy, honoring the past, and embracing the present together. Spring arrived gradually, bringing with it a palette of fresh colors and scents. Margaret awoke to the sound of birdsong, the sun streaming through her curtains, and the gentle rustle of leaves outside her window. The world seemed to breathe anew, and with it, her spirits lifted. She dressed lightly, feeling the warm breeze on her skin, and made her way to the town square, where Thomas awaited with his familiar, reassuring smile. They wandered through the blossoming gardens, the air fragrant with tulips, daffodils, and the delicate perfume of jasmine. Margaret marveled at the renewal around her, the way each petal seemed to hold the promise of new beginnings. Thomas commented on the small details, the way a bee hovered over a flower, the gentle sway of branches in the wind, and Margaret found herself noticing things she had once overlooked. The world felt vivid, alive, and teeming with possibility. Their conversations turned to the past, recalling moments of both triumph and regret, each memory a thread weaving the tapestry of their lives. Margaret spoke of her own dreams that had been postponed, the fears she had carried, and the lessons learned through decades of living. Thomas listened intently, offering insights without judgment, his presence a steady anchor in her reflective journey. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for his companionship, realizing that true connection was a gift not bound by age. One afternoon, they stumbled upon a small community fair. Margaret hesitated at first, wary of the crowds, but Thomas gently encouraged her to join in the festivities. They wandered past colorful stalls, sampled homemade treats, and even tried their hand at a few games. Laughter came easily, unrestrained, echoing through the warm spring air. Margaret noticed how natural it felt to embrace spontaneity with Thomas, a freedom she had rarely allowed herself before. Later, they found a quiet bench beneath a blooming cherry tree, its petals drifting softly to the ground. Margaret rested her head on Thomas's shoulder, feeling a serenity she had not experienced in years. They spoke in hushed tones about their hopes, the kind that were measured and thoughtful, yet no less potent. She realized that love at this stage of life was quieter, gentler, but no less profound. It was the kind that healed old wounds, that nurtured growth, and that offered companionship without demand. As the days grew longer and the sun lingered in the sky, Margaret began to notice small changes within herself. She felt more open, more willing to take risks, and more attuned to the beauty in everyday moments. Thomas inspired her to explore new hobbies, to revisit passions long abandoned, and to embrace life fully. Their bond deepened, not through grand gestures, but through shared experiences, quiet support, and unwavering presence. Summer arrived with golden sunlight that stretched lazily across the town, warming cobblestone streets and casting a gentle glow on Margaret's favorite garden paths. The days were long and rich with possibility, and Margaret found herself eagerly anticipating each morning. She and Thomas had established a rhythm, a comforting pattern of shared breakfasts, afternoon walks, and quiet evenings filled with conversation or reading together. It was a gentle, steady companionship that brought a deep sense of peace. One morning, they decided to explore a nearby lake Margaret had not visited in years. The water sparkled under the sun, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and the distant mountains framed the horizon with their serene majesty. They rented a small rowboat, and as they paddled, Margaret felt the tension of past years melt away with every ripple. Thomas's presence was reassuring, steady, and unspokenly protective, allowing her to simply exist in the moment without fear or expectation. They lingered by the shore, enjoying a picnic of fresh bread, cheese, and fruit, the aroma of the summer air mingling with the scent of wildflowers nearby. Margaret laughed more freely than she had in years, the sound bright and melodic, mingling with the calls of distant birds. Thomas teased her gently when she dropped crumbs or accidentally spilled juice, and she found herself grateful for the ease with which they shared such simple, intimate moments. As the summer progressed, they attended local concerts and community gatherings. Margaret had always been cautious in crowds, but with Thomas she felt a newfound courage. Dancing under strings of twinkling lights, She realized that joy was not bound by youth. It could be rediscovered at any age in any setting. The experience awakened a youthful spirit within her, tempered by decades of wisdom, allowing her to embrace life's pleasures without reservation or self-consciousness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Thomas and Margaret sat on a park bench, hands intertwined. They spoke of dreams, not the ones left behind, but the ones still possible. Margaret admitted her fears of aging and the uncertainty of the future, and Thomas listened with patient understanding. His calm reassurance reminded her that companionship could carry strength, comfort, and a sense of security that was rare and precious. Summer's warmth and light seemed to mirror Margaret's own inner transformation. She became more adventurous, more willing to try new experiences, and more attuned to the beauty around her. Whether it was a quiet walk in the evening, a shared meal, or simply watching the stars, each moment with Thomas carried a richness she had never anticipated. She felt alive in ways that were subtle yet profound, discovering that the depth of connection and love grew with time and patience. Autumn arrived with a crisp breeze and golden leaves that danced along the streets, signaling the slow passage of time. Margaret and Thomas embraced the season with a quiet contentment, savoring the lingering warmth of the days while preparing for the cool evenings ahead. Their routine had become a comforting rhythm, each day marked by small joys and shared moments that deepened their bond. Margaret often reflected on how unexpected life could be, and how the most meaningful connections sometimes appeared when least anticipated. One Sunday afternoon, they visited a local art exhibit featuring landscapes and portraits. Margaret admired the way colors and textures captured emotion and memory, and Thomas encouraged her to share her thoughts aloud. They lingered before a painting of a serene lake, recalling their own summer excursion, and laughed at the familiarity of certain scenes. These reflections reminded Margaret that life was a collection of moments, both grand and ordinary, and that each one held significance when shared with someone who truly understood you. As the days grew shorter, they spent more time at home, cooking meals together, reading aloud, and recounting stories from their pasts. Margaret found herself sharing memories she had kept private for decades, trusting Thomas with fragments of her life she had long considered hers alone. In turn, Thomas shared his own experiences, the wisdom gained from years lived fully, sometimes imperfectly. In their honesty, Margaret discovered that intimacy was not measured by years spent together, but by the depth of understanding and empathy shared between two hearts. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, the room bathed in warm light and shadows flickering across the walls, Thomas reached for her hand. "I never imagined finding this kind of connection again," he said softly. Margaret smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Neither did I," she admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had traveled together, the losses, the rediscoveries, the growth, and the unexpected joy that had arrived when life had seemed ordinary. The months unfolded gently, with walks through amber-colored parks, visits to friends and family, and quiet nights spent in shared silence that spoke louder than words. Margaret learned that love in later years carried a unique richness, patience, understanding, humor, and the comfort of knowing someone would stand by you, not out of necessity, but out of genuine choice. Each day became an opportunity to embrace life fully, savoring the fleeting beauty of ordinary moments that were, in truth, extraordinary. As winter approached, Margaret reflected on the transformation she had experienced. From the cautious woman, hesitant to trust again, she had grown into someone who welcomed love and companionship with an open heart. Thomas had become not only a partner, but a mirror of her own resilience and capacity for joy. They had discovered that the heart's capacity to connect, heal, and flourish was not confined by age, but strengthened by it. On a quiet December evening, as snowflakes gently fell outside their window, Margaret and Thomas sat together, sipping tea and watching the world transform into a glistening wonderland. They held hands, feeling the warmth of shared experience, and understood that life's later chapters could be as full of love, laughter, and discovery as any other. In each other they had found a second chance at happiness, proving that it is never too late to embrace the richness of life and the profound gift of companionship. And as the night deepened, with the quiet world outside blanketed in snow, Margaret felt a contentment that was deep, enduring, and complete. The journey had been long, but every step had led her to this moment, a life renewed, a heart rekindled, and love found once again.